Good morning. So shall we start because it's 2 minutes past 10. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session number 2 of this webinar on carbon markets organized by the Andalusian Climate Change Office within our project NACAO. It's an Interreg Europe project. Most of you probably participated in the session 1. To let you know that today the session will be focused on nature-based solutions. And let's move to the contents so that we have a lot of time for questions. And speaking of questions, you can use the chat to write your questions in the chat, but also you will have the opportunity to ask alive, simply raising your hand and speaking directly to the speakers, okay? So you can use both channels. I will say only a few words about the structure of today. Immediately, I will give the floor to the speakers, to Luis and José Antonio. After their presentations, we will have time for questions. And finally, Inmaculada Tola, the director of the Climate Change Office, will closure the webinar. So, José Antonio, Luis, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I hope everything is okay today and we don't have the troubles of the last session. So, well, let's go. Let's start. As our colleague told you, we are facing today's sessions focus on nature-based systems and nature-based solutions. There are two parts. I will be in charge of the introductory part and the introduction and explaining some of the basic concepts regarding the characteristics of the nature-based solutions and the offsetting scheme. And Luis will be in charge of the second part, more focused on European regulation and Article 6 of Paris Agreement. So fingers crossed. I hope you are watching correctly the PowerPoint. No.
Not now. Not now.
No?
No, but we try now.
No, I can't believe it.
Now we are seeing, José Antonio, perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry. Okay, hello, let's go. We start, and when we talk about carbon markets, if you remember, we were talking about mandatory or compliance carbon markets and voluntary carbon markets. And there are, if you remember, there are some difference between both, but one of the most important differences is that the product what we are trading in both markets, in the compliance carbon markets, in the mandatory carbon markets, we sell and buy emissions from the different facilities. I think Luis, you should be muted because no. Okay, sorry. And
Luis, perdón. Luis creo que tiene que ponerse unos auriculares porque se te escucha a través del ordenador de Luis.
Okay. Ponte los auriculares. So, sorry. And so the product we are trading in the compliance carbon markets is the emissions, GHGs emissions, greenhouse gases emissions. And in the mandatory market, we are trading with emission reductions. And we have three options or three alternatives to generate these emission reductions. First is changing the way we use and we produce energy, especially when we talk about the deployment of the use of fossil energy or improving our levels of energy efficiency. This is one of the most popular way to generate emission reduction. And the other is using technology to capture and store CO2 from industrial facilities. So this is most is more focused on the use of this technology are engineering, and the other way to generate these emission reductions and carbon removal is to use the ecosystem services to improve the characteristics of the ecosystems, to enhance the ecosystem systems, the ecosystem services to capture CO2 from the atmosphere. So these are obviously the nature-based solutions. So when we talk about these nature-based solutions, we have a very wide options to undertake project activities under this scheme. But I think that it's important to understand some of the difference. We have a table in another slide with the difference between technology solutions and nature-based solutions. So it's with a very detailed information, but it's important to understand that in most of the cases, nature-based solutions are more cost-effective, are more easily scalable, and the capacity of the nature-based solutions to provide co-benefits, ecological benefits, social benefits, health benefits is very, very relevant. So when we talk about these nature-based solutions in the field of mitigation, we can obviously think on forestation and reforestation, of course, and the conservation of the forest. This is one of the most popular idea. The second is the soil carbon sequestration, and this is focused in improving agricultural and land use practice to enhance carbon retention. For example, with activity in conservation agriculture, agroforestry, or pasture restoration. And well, this is very interesting field to develop. And the other is when we have divided the other options between wetland conservations, and the wetland conservation is primarily focused on ecosystems located in transitional zones between land and water, the swamps, estuaries, marshes, and the other could be we have described like marine-based solutions, more focused on ecosystems that are primary within the ocean and marine environments. So, well, why the nature-based solutions and the project activities under these schemes are so interesting? We used to say that it's a win-win-win strategy, because this type of nature-based project activity can provide benefits in three fields. First, in mitigation, we can reduce the emissions when we are protecting, for example, some ecosystems, and we are improving the capacity of these ecosystems to promote or to enhance the carbon sequestration. The other interesting benefit from this type of projects is that is in the field of adaptation, because when we have healthy ecosystems providing good environmental services, we are improving the climate resilience, and we are improving the capacity of this ecosystem to recover from the climate impacts, and this has a very direct link with the capacity of the society to face some of the impacts of the climate change. And the other big benefit of this type of projects are the co-benefits, the cross-sectional effects, because we can improve, of course, the biodiversity, improve water quality, and the livelihood, the quality of life of the local communities. So from all these perspectives, we think that this type of carbon offsets, emission reductions. These type of projects are very interesting. So, well, I told you that we have a table. It's quite detailed, but with the difference between nature-based carbon offsets and technological carbon offsets. We can focus in some of these topics. For example, well, the mechanisms we have been talking about it is first in nature-based is the leverage neutral process, and technological is the use of engineering solutions to capture, remove, or avoid carbon emissions. The presence of co-benefits is more relevant in nature-based solutions. And in general terms, we can consider that the co-benefits from the technological carbon offset are this option has a very limited capacity to provide co-benefits such as well, labor perhaps, but there is a very limited capacity to create co-benefits. The other key difference is the cost. In general terms, we can consider that the project activities under the nature-based solutions are more cost-effective, and the cost per ton is lower. But in general, but nowadays, the cost of the CO2 abated is quite expensive in technology solutions. So probably once we have more developed all these technologies, and with scale economy or different improvements in the operational and functional of this type of energy, of this type of solution, the cost could be lower. But nowadays, there's a very significant difference between the cost of both options and solutions. Well, the implementation times in the nature-based solutions, we can obtain some of the results well with a very different time of period. Sometimes are years, sometimes are decades. But the problem is that nowadays some of these technological options are in pilot phase, and it's not very well developed system. So these are one of the main problems. Of course, potential risk is what the wildfires or problems with deforestation and extreme weather can impact in a very significant way in the nature-based solutions. And one of the potential risk in the technological carbon offsets is, for example, the energy demand, or as we have been talking about it, is very costly to undertake this type of investment. So these are some of the problems that we are facing. This challenge, and we can consider that that one of the challenge that nature-based offsets can face. At first, one, we have been talking about the permanence risk. For example, we talked about the deforestation or the wildfires who led the carbon back into the atmosphere. Another problem with the challenging nature-based project is the monitoring, reporting, and verification schemes. Some of the schemes, some of the standards are not very strict with the monitoring, report, verification, and this is a very important part of the carbon markets, because, as you know, the carbon markets needs trust, and we need to have a very well-developed monitoring, reporting, and verification. We need to know everything about the emission reductions and the carbon removals, and how is working this project activity. The land competition. For example, it is possible to find in some cases that there is a conflict with, for example, with agriculture or with indigenous rights. We need, if you remember, we need to develop this type of solutions considering the co-benefits. So considering that we are not harming other sectors or other rights. So this is very important, and it's we have to take into consideration this land or this potential challenge of the land competition when we consider to develop a project activity under the nature-based solutions. The market transparency is very linked with monitoring, reporting, and verification. It's quite often that some project developers use a very beautiful words, but well, they are not very transparent. When you study the project activity, you can find that some of the promises made by these project developers are not real. So this is one of the things that we have to, as I say it again, take into considerations. And well, the time scale limitations, we can obtain some benefits in the more or less a short term, perhaps years, but sometimes the projects will provide all the benefits in carbon removal or emission reductions, for example, during decades or in a few decades. So this is one of the challenges that we need to face when we are talking about these nature-based solutions. But so why? For us, it's very interesting to understand that the nature-based offsets to include in the voluntary carbon market. First, because I think when we have selected 5 of advantage from this type of projects, the scalability, if the conditions of the ecosystems are more or less similar, you can reproduce, you can scale the pilot project to a bigger surface, or to you can transfer some of the actions of your project activity to similar ecosystems. We have been talking about the cost effectiveness. It's the cost of per carbon removal, per ton of carbon removal is very cost effective if you are comparing these solutions with technological solutions. You can obtain the co-benefits, biodiversity protection, community benefits, and usually you will have an improvement in some of the ecosystem services, in parallel ecosystem services. You are improving this ecosystem or the biodiversity. You are sequestrating carbon. You are removing carbon from the atmosphere, but you are probably improving the water and air quality of this type of project. So why these are so interesting to use nature-based solutions with the carbon offset? And now we are focused specifically in the use of removals as offsets, and in some concepts that sometimes we don't have very clear. For example, well, offsetting, the first concept is offsetting is, when we talk about offsetting, is a climate action that enable an organization or an individual to compensate the emission that they cannot avoid. This is the classical definition of offsetting. If you remember, one of the difference between mandatory carbon markets, compliance carbon markets, and voluntary carbon markets was not only in the product that we are selling and buying, is in the objective of the compliance market. When we are talking about the compliance market, the main objective is to limit the emissions from different sectors, usually the most intensive sectors in terms of energy, fossil energy, and in terms of CO2 emissions. So we design a cap, a limit, and this is a way to fight against these free greenhouse gas emissions along the different years. But the target or the objective of the voluntary carbon market is not to limit the emissions. We have to think that there is no limit, that there is no cap in the voluntary markets. So this is a way to provide finance to project activities. And many of the project activities in this scheme of nature-based solutions have difficulties to obtain economic returns. This is, for example, very different between energy reductions when you use, for example, renewable energies or wind farms or solar photovoltaic, and when you use nature-based solutions for to obtain carbon credits and emissions offsets. Because if you are reducing CO2 emissions in both the type of projects, but it's obviously you can have a benefit selling the energy, the electricity, the power from the wind farm or the photovoltaic power plant, and it sometimes is very difficult to monetize the projects of based on nature-based solutions. So it's quite often that the only way to finance some of this type of project is selling the carbon credits in the voluntary carbon markets. So this is a very important question that we have to think. And there are two concepts that most of the people use in the same way, but there is a very little bit, a little difference between both. One is the carbon offset and the carbon credit. And as you can read, the carbon offset is a climate concept. We can understand the carbon offset like a climate concept, and is the consequent, the result of a project activity. But the carbon credit really is a product, a tradable certificate. So this is the way that the market use this carbon offset in a specific way. So this is very important to understand that, for example, both carbon offsets and carbon credits, you need a project activity to generate them. But as I told you in the last sentences, all the credits and offsets require project, but not all the project generates, for example, credits or offset. You can offset, so you can generate offset if you have a good monitoring, reporting, verification, for example. You have a very accountability about all the parameters of your project, and you will have credits if you are in line with some of the schemes in the voluntary carbon markets, or gold standard, BCS, in Spain, climate projects. We have several different schemes. So this is a very small difference, but it is important to have all this clear, because we can have in a project we can generate a carbon offset, but it's not necessary that we are generating carbon credits. So this is one of the difference important. And the other word that is important is that when we are talking about carbon offset, we are talking about retiring the carbon offset credits. And this is a fundamental principle that ensures that the integrity and the credibility of the carbon neutrality claims. Why? Because when you retire this carbon credit from a registry, you are preventing, for example, that this carbon credit come back to the market and could be used for another organization to claim that they are climate neutral. So it is very important that all these carbon credits are in a common registry, and now we are talking about it. But it is very important, the concept of retiring carbon offset. If you are only buying and selling the same carbon credit, of course, you can say we are climate neutral today. We are offsetting our emission with these carbon credits, and you can see, for example, all these certificates. But if tomorrow you sell these carbon credits, these certificates, of course, you are not climate neutral. So this is very important, that the concept of retiring from the registries the carbon credit that you are using to offset your emissions in your organization or in your company. Most of the projects are developed to obtain or to generate carbon credits in schemes. And Luis told you the last session about different type of schemes, international, some of them were in the national schemes, but all of these used to share a common, the common steps. Well, there are some small differences, but here you can see, for example, some of these steps. The first step is obviously to design the project. You need to check the feasibility of the project, of course, the design, the technical design of the project, the financial design of the project. And then when you have all this work done, then you are you can write we call it the project design document, the PDD, or the name can change between different schemes. But once all of this information is clear and you have checked that you are in line with the requirements in this scheme, and this is very important because not all the schemes accept all the types of projects. There are different types of projects. So when you have all this information, you can prepare the project design documents, and this document contains all the basic information of the project objective, the location, when the project is to be implemented, or the project duration, the crediting period, the monitoring period, all this specific information. The second stage, or the second step, used to be the validation, and in the validation is when an independent auditor examines the PDD and all the information and all the evidence that are provided by the project developer. And this phase also involves field visits with on-site interviews and analysis, and to act as a validator, you need to be accredited by the, usually by the regulatory office of this scheme. You can see Berico, AENOR, TÜV. You can find several auditors that are accredited to act as a validation and verification body. And the main objective of this validation is to assess and to check that all the information described in the evidence and the project design document is in line with the requirements of the scheme. The validation has been has a positive opinion. The project is registered, and the project is registered is that, okay, now you are a project accepted by the scheme, and now you can start to generate carbon credits with a specific information. And then when the project is undertaken and is registered, you need to start with the monitoring phase. So the monitoring phase begins, and the project developer needs to monitor and document all the data of the project activity and all the operational parameters and the progress of the project activity. This is very important because the PDD and the validation, if you think, they are considering the initial phases of the project activity. And this is what we think that we can generate, that this is, we think, what can, that in the future is what we can obtain. But once the project is registered and the project is developed, you need to check that if, for example, some of the assumptions made during the initial phases are stable. And of course, if you say that every year I can generate 1,000 carbon credits, and maybe the reality is that you are generating 1,000 carbon credits, 900 or 1,000 or 2,000 carbon credits. So this is a very important step, because we have detected sometimes that many of the project developers consider that once the project is registered, I can forget the project. But this is absolutely no sense, because if you have a registered project and you don't apply a correct monitoring, you cannot generate carbon credits. So it's completely useless. There are two concepts that are important. We have to need to have clear. First, the crediting period. And the crediting period is the period during which the project activity can generate carbon credits. For example, in most of the schemes, are some 21 years or 10 years or 7 years. It depends. And the monitoring period is the duration of, for example, used to be around 1 year, perhaps 2 years, and that you are checking, you are calculating the emission reductions. So every monitoring period, you need the other step is the verification. When you finish a monitoring period, for example, after a year of your project activity, once more a third-party auditor need to come to your project to check that you are correctly monitored the parameters and the calculations are correct. Once again, you have field visits and interviews, and well, this is a very important, because once the verification opinion is positive, then the regulatory office make the last step. Well, the almost last step is the issuance of verification emission reductions. Is okay. We have a registry, and we can yes, we can talk about that. It's like a used to be like a number, but it's a certificate, and so you can say that this registered project is producing, for example, 100 or 1,000 carbon credits, and these carbon credits are now in the market when they have been used. And the last step is the retirement or the selling of this verification, the verified emission reductions, and the retirement. One of the organization can go to this registry and buy a specific quantity of these emission reductions, and then they can retire to claim that they are carbon neutral. One of the most criticisms of emissions offsetting is that the program, this type of programs only constitute greenwashing actions, and this is very common. We cannot tell you names, but we have seen sometimes project developers that they were talking about intelligent seeds, blockchains, and artificial intelligence. The words were very, very beautiful, but the project was absolute disaster. And the other problem with this is that if you have enough money, you can be climate neutral tomorrow. You only need to measure your carbon footprint, and you need to buy the carbon credits in the same quantity that are your emissions. But you are forgetting the most important part of the strategy, the offsetting strategy, is the reductions of your footprint, of your carbon footprint. So the first part is you need to measure, you need to know yourself, you need to know where are the origin of your carbon emissions, of course, the quantity of carbon emissions in the scope 1, 2, and 3. The second part of the correct or perfect offsetting strategy is to reduce in the emissions in your organization, but sometimes you can have some emissions that cannot be reduced because because there is no technical possibility to reduce this type of emissions, sometimes with the process emissions, or because it's unfeasible from an economic point of view. And then you can use these offsets credits, these carbon credits, to compensate your these emissions not reduced in your organizations. And if you are not reducing your carbon footprint, you are not correctly applying an offsetting project. But all the carbon credits are the same, are equal, and in reality we can consider that this is not true. And at first we have been working 20 years or 25 years in climate change. In the first stages, almost carbon reductions or carbon credits were the same. But for example, I will try to explain this. If you have a hydroelectric power plant, and this hydroelectric power plant can generate emission reductions because you are generating power without greenhouse gas emissions. But the problem is that if you are developing this hydropower plant affecting local communities or impacting specific or very special ecosystems, in reality, you can reduce emission reductions from the baseline of this country, but in most of the cases, this carbon credit is not a quality. We are talking, and we have to remember that when we are talking about climate neutrality, we are talking about reputation. So this is very important, that if you are claiming that you are offsetting some part of your emissions, you need to be sure that these offsets are in the best of the best quality possible to avoid reputational risk. So this is very, very important to have this clear. And if we can think that this is very easy to understand, the problem is that to bring this concept to the in practical terms. So here, and the last slide from my side, is first that we need to consider some characteristics of your carbon credit to identify this carbon credit as a high quality. For example, the emission reductions for the carbon need to be additional. Luis told you several slides during the last sessions. The permanence is very important. You need to ensure that the carbon credit is going to, especially when we talk about carbon removals, during a long time period. Of course, you need to offset your emissions with carbon credits from a scheme, from a registry, with a good characteristics in terms of verification and transparency. The co-benefits, we have been very focused during a lot of years in monitoring, in the methodology, in accounting, in the carbon accounting, but sometimes we have forgotten the importance of the co-benefits. So if you are using carbon offsets to carbon credits to offset your emissions, you need to be sure that they are there are co-benefits in this. Of course, that the methodology used to calculate these carbon credits, well, it's not overestimation. There is no it's not overestimated, and you need to ensure that the project does not negatively impact environmental or other social conditions. So this concept of do not significant harm, we know this very well in the European Union, but it is very important that we need to consider to check all this information, that we are sure that the carbon credit we are buying to offset our emissions is a carbon credit of a high quality. So now I am going to mute because...
Thank you very much, Jose Antonio, for the explanations and also for the very nice presentation, which is very attractive in format also. And maybe before moving to the second part with Luis, we could maybe have a couple of questions now, so that we give a little bit of participation to our attendants. And then we continue with Luis and more questions at the end. But maybe if some of you audience wants to ask something, maybe we could have a couple of questions now. Is anyone wanting to ask something? You can simply raise your hand and speak. Okay, then we can wait for the end. Everything was clear, says one of our colleagues from France. Okay, so then let's move with Luis for the second part, and we will have some more time for questions at the end. Okay, Luis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gemma, and well, good morning to everyone. I'm afraid that this second part is not going to be so interesting as the first one, because we are going to talk about the European regulation, and more in detail, we are going to assess the new regulation 2024/3012 that establishes the certification framework for permanent carbon sequestration. And well, this is not going to be so interesting, but let's move to the presentation. And first of all, a review of what means the LULUCF, the land use and land use change sector, according to the IPCC definitions. So this specific sector, again, land use change and forestry, covers the land management of croplands, the land management of grasslands, wetlands, forests, and also green areas in all urban settlements, okay? But includes also the land use change, such as afforestation, that means replanting, deforestation, and also reforestation, that is the recovering of a forest in a specific land area. Okay? If we have an overlook of what is the importance of this sector, we can see that in the European Union, more than 75% of the surface of the European territory is covered by agricultural and forest land. So it means that we have in this LULUCF sector a great opportunity to increase the carbon removals, atmospheric CO2 sequestration from the atmosphere, and to create, because of that, a decisive, important element in the fight against climate change. The account of this carbon sequestration, these carbon removals in the European Union, the average value is higher than 230 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. So if, for example, we have a look to the situation in Spain, we in Spain covers more or less an average of 15%, 15% of our emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, total greenhouse emissions, with these carbon removals from the atmosphere. So next one, please. Now it's important to check which is the targets of the European Union and the European Commission regarding these carbon offsets and the situation of our carbon removals. According to the European climate law, that is stated by a specific regulation, the regulation 1119 of the year 2021, we have, among other key elements of objectives, first of all is the climate neutrality of the European Union by the year 2050. As you may remember, we talked about this concept in the first session, but it means that the carbon removals from the atmosphere will be equal than the total greenhouse gas emissions quantity. Furthermore, from the year 2050 in advance, the European Union intends to achieve negative emissions. It will mean that the carbon removals will be higher than the total quantity of greenhouse gas emissions, and this is our target. This is the objective of the European Union, according to our law, according to the European law. We have an intermediate target of reducing 55% of our emissions by the year 2030, just in 4 years and a half time, or 5 years and a half time, in comparison with the levels of greenhouse gas emissions that were achieved in 1990. Okay, so this is the baseline that we have, the year 1990, and all the reduction objectives will be focused on this year, and that will be the first year on the accounting. Also, the European Union, well, the law states that there is going to be set a cap on the quantity of removals that can be, let's say, that be considered to compensate internally the quantity of greenhouse gas emissions inside the European Union. That's because the Commission or the European Union wants to increase the effort based on the technological change. That is our first point. That is the main objective of all the policy of the European Union. Obviously, to increase all carbon removals, but also to focus on the technological change, to the technological improvement, and according to the actual times, to be also self-dependent of our own resources. As an intermediate target in the year 2040, the intention is to set an objective, but it is not still legal. It is not still considered in any regulation. The objective for the year 2040 is a net reduction of 90% of the total greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990 levels. Last but not least, the voluntary roadmaps that the key sectors of the economy should develop in a voluntary way to reach or to help the European Union to get this climate neutrality target in the year 2050. That voluntary roadmaps could mean a market demand, a good market demand for certified removal units within the European Union and in the frame of the regulation that we are going to start assessing right now. So next one, please. So going directly to the regulation, to the regulation 3012 of the year 2024, that was established by the European Parliament and of the Council, dated on 27th of November, that established a union certification framework for permanent carbon removals, carbon farming, and carbon storage in products. Okay, it was published on the 6th of December in the last year in the official journal of the European Union, and it came into force on December 27th, 3 weeks after its publication. So it means that this baby has only three months life. Okay, so we are just seeing the first steps of this new regulation, and we have to consider that this regulation has been established after a long process of discussion within the European Parliament and between the European Parliament and the European Commission. Okay, there was finally a mandate from the Parliament to create this certification framework, and the objective of the regulation is to establish a voluntary framework within the European Union for the certification of carbon removals and emission reduction from agricultural land as permanent results, okay, and carbon farming and carbon storage activities in products as temporary removals. So we will see in the next slide the key elements of this regulation, but the first thing that we have to have in mind is the regulation creates two different types of two different kinds or two different categories of carbon removals, permanent or temporal, okay? And also this regulation is related with some other regulations, with some other regulation from the European Union, in particular the regulation for 8041 and 8042 from the year 2018, and the regulation that we have seen before, the European Climate Law, the 1119 from year 2021. Also refers, and it's very important to take into account, different points of the Directive 203/87 and 218/2001. A very important thing, it is mentioned in the text of the regulation continuously that future delegated acts are going to, we are going to consider also and to see this idea in the next slides, but those future delegated acts are going to be the cornerstones of the certification system, because the delegated acts to be published according to the European Commission provisions by the end of this year are going to establish these key elements, these key cornerstones as the methodologies to be used, and some other conditions are going to be established in the delegated act. So not all the regulation is now ready, but let's say the basis of the regulation is what we are going to see or what we can have on consulting in the text of this law. Next one, please. So the key elements of the regulation are, first of all, the typology of removal units. As mentioned before, there are two different, there are four different typologies, okay? There are four different categories, but two of them have the consideration of permanent removals, and two of them have the consideration of temporary removals, okay? So there is also a specific framework for project activities, for the project activities that are going to create these carbon removals. The project activities need to accomplish different quality requirements. They have to generate net removals of detuitions from emissions in the soil. They have to accomplish with additionality conditions and additionality requirements, and also with sustainability requirements. So these three elements are the most important regulation in this text for the project activities itself. The regulation also refers to the methodologies to be used, that they can be both standardized baselines or specific baselines for the project activity in particular. Another operational and key elements of the regulation. A part of the project activity, we have the agents that are considered operators or project activity proponents, okay, project activity developers. The certification schemes, this is a new consideration inside the European Union regulation, but this regulations consider the fact that the certification schemes are going to rule and work with the removal units. Okay, the certification bodies as will work as the third independent third-party certification, and the fact that they are going to be registers for of the certification schemes that are going to be lately unified in the register of the European Union, the European Commission, according to what is stated in this text. Next one, please. Another important thing is the use of the certified removal units. What we can do with the certified removal units that are going to be created on the recent regulation. The regulation clearly states, okay, that all carbon removals and soil emission reductions that are going to be generated according to this regulation shall only contribute to the achievement of the union's indices, to the union's nationally determined contributions and the climate targets of the member states. Okay, cannot be used. Okay, cannot be transferred to contribute to NDC's national determined contributions of third countries, of countries that are not European member states, and they cannot be also transferred. They cannot be also used to international compliance schemes or to international voluntary schemes. So these certified units, these certified removals, can only be used, okay, inside the same country or among the countries of the European Union. This is the first statement, but if we go to the end of the document, if we go to Article 18, okay, the document, the regulation has 19 articles. So Article number 18 states that by 31st July 2026, the Commission shall assess the additional requirements necessary to align this regulation with Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Okay, and in particular, the Commission shall review the use of certified units to offset emissions generated outside the European Union. Okay, so it means that the European Commission reserves the right to modify the use of these carbon removals to be subject of international market, of at least interchange between parties of the convention, of the climate change, United Nations Framework on Climate Change Convention. So next one, please. Well, going to the typology of units, we have said before that there are two different kinds of units: permanent units, permanent carbon removal units, and temporary carbon removal units. So according to the definitions of the regulation, the permanent units are two different units that came from two different activities. Okay, the first activity is the permanent carbon sequestration, that is defined as a process that captures and stores atmospheric or biogenic carbonations for several centuries, for more than, let's say, 100 or 200 years, but the quantity of time is not specified. It's a real long-term time of carbon sequestration. Okay, so permanent carbon sequestration activities will generate a permanent carbon sequestration unit. Okay, that is a ton of CO2 equivalent that also will have a certified net benefit of permanent carbon sequestration. The second concept of an activity that is going to create a permanent unit is the soil emission reduction. Okay, a soil emission reduction is the action of reduction of net greenhouse gas emissions that happens or are coming from biogenic carbon storage. Biogenic carbon storage, according to the European Union legislation, is the living biomass, the litter, dead wood, dead organic matter, mineral soils, and organic soils. Okay, So any activity that we can create to reduce these soil emissions will create a soil emission reduction unit, okay, that is, again, a metric a ton of CO2 equivalent that is generated by these kind of activities that are also mentioned as a carbon farming activity. I have to confess that at this point I have or I think that it is necessary a little much better definition of these activities and permanent units, because carbon farming, as you are going to see in the next slide, is referred also to temporary carbon activities. So when we talk about this second kind, we refer to the creation of temporary units. And in this case, again, the carbon farming is understood by the regulation as a process that is carried out over a period of activity of at least 5 years. So we are talking about short term for this project activity or for this project development. The carbon farming is related to the management of a terrestrial or coastal environment, okay, and involves the capture and temporary storage of atmospheric carbon or biogenic carbon in a biogenic carbon storage, okay. So this activity of short terms in comparison with the long-term units, with the long-term activities, creates a carbon sequestration unit. And also we have the definition of processes that are called as product carbon storage. The product carbon storage is understood as a process that captures and stores atmospheric carbon for at least 35 years in durable products. Products, for example, that can be understood as the wood that are used in the construction activities. This product carbon storage will generate a product carbon storage unit, okay, that again is a metric ton of CO2 equivalent generated by these kind of activities and that are going to be certified, and also the certification will ensure the accountability and storage of this carbon for this at least 35 years. So temporary units are created by short-term activities, short-term activities, and definitive units, or what we have defined as permanent units, are created by activities that will create permanent carbon sequestration for many years, for several centuries, but with no further precision from this text. By the 31st of July of next year, or 2026, in the review of the regulation, the Commission will check if 2 new sectors of the agricultural activity, in particular enteric fermentation and manure management, are going to be included in within the activities that are considered in this regulation to create emission reductions of net carbon removals. Next one, please. So, regulation for project activities is a little bit longer, is a little bit more complex. But first of all, we have to consider that project activities shall demonstrate that they generate net removals of atmospheric carbon compared to the baseline, and also taking into account the greenhouse gas emissions that may happen, that may be the consequence of their activity. Okay, so we have always to take into account the balance between the baseline, that is the carbon removals that happens without the project activity, the greenhouse gas emissions, and in the other side, the removals or the soil emission avoidance that are going to be created by the project activity. And that balance must be positive. We have to reach a net carbon removals or net emissions, reduction emissions from the soil. Okay, as mentioned before, it can be used standardized baselines or specific baselines for a project activity, and the methodologies that are going to clarify how to use these standardized baselines or specific baselines are going to be approved, are going to be shown by the delegated acts. That's important that of this secondary regulation that will come in within the next months that I mentioned before. The project activity needs to develop a temporary monitoring period, okay? Obviously, the operator or the project activity developer needs to monitor the dilution of soil emissions or the increase of carbon storage, okay? And the monitoring methods should combine in situ measurements with remote sensing or modeling. The interest of the Commission is to make it not so expensive and not so complicated, as the Commission understands, to introduce for the assessment of the achievements of each project activity the remote sensing if possible. Okay. Additionality conditions for the project activities are well, basically 2, but 4 in particular. The project operator, the project activity operator, must not be obligated by national or European Union legal requirements to improve the activity, to go ahead with the activity. So this no obligation according to the law does not apply to the project, but applies to the project operator. Okay, the activity is only financially viable because of the income coming from the certifications that are going to be selling in the market or are going to be subject of interchange with a monetary resource. When the project activity uses a standardized baseline, then the additionality is automatically, okay? And if there is a specific baseline to be used for the project activity, that the methodology of the specific baseline shall provide the additionality test. Needs to show which are the conditions of additionality for the project activities. Okay, and in parallel, project activities needs to meet and to demonstrate that it meet sustainability criteria, in particular the contribution to climate change adaptation, sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems, contributions to circular economy, etc. So there is a lot of conditions to be met by the project activities. Okay, next one, please. Regarding the certification schemes, okay, certification schemes is a relatively new figure in the European Climate Change Regulation, and they already exist in other areas, such as the certification of renewable biomass or the certification of what we call as the RFNBOS, the renewable fuels of non-biogenic origin. Okay, so it is not exactly new, but relatively new, let's say. The certification schemes can be, according to the regulator, according to this regulation, can be public or private entities. If it is going to be a public entity, okay, the member state shall apply to the European Commission for the recognition of this public entity. So it means that the European Union regions could be an entity of the European Union regions could be a certification scheme to be recognized by the European Commission to rule this regulation. If it is a private entity, the legal representative shall notify the Commissions for recognition. Okay. Something that is, well, for me a little bit strange to understand is that the regulations clearly states that the operators or project promoters may only use a certification scheme, may only use one certification scheme for a period of 5 years. Okay, so each 5 years, the adhesion of a project promoter of operator to a certification scheme must be renewed. The certification scheme basically establishes the membership rules, the certification process, needs to handle a public registry. Okay, in this public registry, all the documentation must be public, except those parts of the documents that could be considered confidential. They have to run also specific methodologies, and they have the obligation to issue the certified units once the project activities shows and demonstrate that they accomplish with the requirements of the European Commission. Okay, and something that also is not easy to implement is that the regulation requests the registers to operate in, let's say, in a cooperation system, the registers. So these registers of the certification schemes must be interoperable and must be communicated with each other. The European Commission has the obligations to create its own register by 27 December 2028 at the latest. Okay. And in that moment, all the individual registries must be connected with the central one created by the European Commission. Next one, please. Another, we see the certification process. Okay, certification process is carried out by entities that are acting as independent third parties. These certification entities must be accredited by a national accreditation body of any of the member states, or could be recognized by a national authority competent for the implementation of the regulation. So it means that not only the, let's say, classical or well-known certification bodies could run the certification process of the regulation. There are two different phases. There are two different steps. The first step is called by the regulation the certification audit. It's the approval of the project. Okay, is the verification of compliance with the applicable requirements. The certification body, once everything is checked and there is a clear idea, there's a positive opinion regarding the complete compliance of requirements by the project activity, the certification body in that moment shall issue a certification audit report that will include a summary and will issue a certification of compliance. So it is more or less an equivalent step of the validation of the project, the approval of the project. And the second step is the what is called the certification renewal audit. And it could be equivalent to a verification process of the net removals or the net reduction achieved. At least every 5 years, or with a high frequency, if it is required by the applied methodology, the certification body must check again that all the specific requirements are accomplished by the project activity, okay? That the accountability of carbon removals or the accountability of emission reduction from the soil are correct, and then when everything is fair, the certification body shall issue a recertification audit report that will include again a summary and a certificate on compliance. With that certificate on compliance and all the information, the certification scheme shall issue the certified units according to the recertification audit. Okay. Something important is that the temporary units, what we mentioned before as the carbon farming sequestration units and product carbon storage units, shall expire at the end of the monitoring period of the project activity and shall be cancelled in the certification register when these temporary units are registered. Okay. But if a long-term storage is going to be is going to be demonstrated by a continued monitoring, these temporary units could still have, let's say, life. But there are no details regarding this in the regulation. Just this paragraph, meaning that temporary units are going to be, let's say, part of the volatility of the system, that they are not going to be cannot be accounted as a permanent reduction. Last but not least,
Luis, sorry to interrupt. Just
yes.
to mention that it is 11:15, so we should be finishing to keep some time for the questions. Okay?
Yes, it's just the end of the presentation. Thank you very much, Gemma. We have in this slide the calendar of the DG Clima from the European Commission, the different milestones to these open discussions that are subject to participation of any of us. The expert group meetings that are going to discuss methodologies and the text of the delegated acts are going to be done according to this calendar. The last slide from my side on the presentation is just a reflection about the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So to put in context the carbon removals within the European Union, considering that it will be open to the international markets or to the, let's say, to the use under the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement outside the European Union, we have to consider that the Article 6.2, that the Article 6.2 mentions the, let's say, the transfer of international transfer of mitigation outcomes between parties of the Paris Agreement. So the transfer of what we call ITMOs. Okay. So Article 6.2 are project-based emissions. Is a project-based emissions mechanisms that is ruled under the supervisory body of the Article 6.4. And Article 6.8 is a non-market-based mechanism. So it means that when there is some cooperation according to this Article 6.8 between or among parties of the Convention, there is no the result of this cooperation that could be substantiated as, for example, technology transfer or capacity building systems. The result is not going to be substantiated in carbon units, okay, in the sense of carbon units. So my presentation, or the presentation, is going to finish with a question, okay? If we consider a region inside the European Union, Moldavia, a very famous region of one of our countries, this region has a commitment with the to increase carbon removals by, for example, 10 million tons of CO2 equivalent. But according to the regulation, in a specific period of time, 11 million tons are subject of certification, can be certified, and Moldavia has the permit and the agreement of his member states, or its member states, to transfer and to drive the transfer of this excess of 1 million ton to a third part outside the European Union for the NDC accomplishment. So my question is, Article 6.2, Article 6.4, or Article 6.8 is going to be the result of, is going to be used for this transfer of this 1 million ton. If anyone would like to give an answer, I will be very pleased. If not, we can solve it after our goodbye that is now here. Again, you have here our emails. In case of any question, you can contact ourselves or transfer your questions to the Junta of Andalusia in case we are not able to answer right now any of the questions. So thank you very much for your attention, for your patience, and we hope that everything was clear enough, and we keep open to your question right now and to the resolution of the last query of the presentation. Thank you.
So simply raise your hand and we will give you the floor. Remember that you can make questions about today's contents, but also if you had some question unresolved from the session 1, it's also the time to launch it.
Gemma, I would like.
Okay, Anna,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. I would like to make a question. Luis, you talk about two concepts, sequestration and reduction all time. What about avoided emissions? Are considered in some way this regulation?
Anna, we cannot hear you very well. We understood the question,
Yeah.
but the microphone is maybe a little bit far.
Thank you very much, Anna. I understood that you were asking about avoided emissions and if they are considered
Now, yeah.
permanent.
You got the question on the chat. Yeah, avoided emissions are considered in some way in the regulation, because we are always talking about sequestration and reduction.
Well, obviously, the avoided emissions, according to this regulation, to this reglement, is the avoided emissions coming from the soils, and they are considered as permanent reduction because it's an avoided emission. Okay, in general, avoided emissions are considered in different ways according to all the European Union regulation. But in this case, in the case of the reglement that we have just seen, the avoided emissions are those that are coming from the organic soils.
Okay, thank you.
There's time for more questions.
Hi, I have a question. I don't know if you hear me correctly.
Yes, Anais, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, so I come from France, where there is already some existing regulation about carbon credits, which is called the Label by Carbone. And so this seems to be quite aligned with the objectives of this label, and I wanted to be sure that this regulation will go in the same way as the existing label, and this could be compatible with what you just presented. I don't know if you have the context, but it's an official label that is made by the ministry, and the ministry gives certificates. It's a bit like the SAT in Andalusia, but at the national level. And so I just wanted to be sure that it was authorized or, I don't know, promoted by this regulation.
Yes, thank you very much, Anais, for your question. We are familiar with that, with the label carbon in France. First of all, in the presentation of the regulation, in the presentation of the text of the regulation, the first part was all the principles of the reglement are stated. The document says that any existing certification system for carbon removals could be running outside this voluntary scheme. So it is not an obligation for any member state to move all its systems, all its certification systems to accomplish with this reglement. In the beginning, I do not see any problem to the existing systems that I know. I'm not sure if 100%, but to give you a definitive answer, we should have in our hands the delegated acts, because according to my experience, the devil is in the details. So maybe something that will be stated in the delegated acts will be contradictory with any of the existing certification systems that runs now inside the European Union. In my opinion, it should not be like that, but I don't know what is going to happen with the delegated acts. The reglement, the preamble, the initial part of the reglement is not part of the law. And the delegated acts are going to be the articles of the delegated act are going to be the key elements to know exactly how it is going to work and which are going to be the interfaces, the interaction with the existing certification systems.
Okay, thank you. So that could be the official credit system from the national level and the official credit system from the EU level, both at the same time.
Yes, it could happen. I don't know if it is going to be practical or if it is, let's say, from a market perspective, it's this co-living of different systems could be practical, but we will see it with the time. But anyway, seems that there should be enough level of freedom degrees that could make all the national actual systems accomplish with the regulation, with the new regulation.
Okay, thank you. Very clear.
Thank you.
Okay, our colleague from Central Finland, our NACAO colleague, Anna-Kaisa, has a question also. Anna-Kaisa, please.
Hello and greetings from Finland. Sorry, my camera isn't working in this application. Actually, I already got my answers on the previous question. I was going to ask same thing that Anna is that when different EU countries and regions may have their own carbon market system already running. In Finland, we don't. So we are really happy about this new legislation that comes from the EU side. But what would happen and what will happen across the Europe, how we harmonize these different already existing systems and the new ones that are built up due to the legislation. But I think that all those aspects were already answered on the previous question. Thank you very much for the both presentations.
Thank you very much, Anna. Let me add to the previous answer that, as I have mentioned in the presentation, public entities may rule a certification system according to this regulation. I don't know how, still the document doesn't say how it must be organized, okay? But it states that, for me, the idea is that the regional systems or itself, the national systems, could be a certification system inside the regulation of the European Union. So it gives room to the existing ones, although maybe some adjustments should be done. Sorry, Gemma, I think I'm muted.
Sorry, I was muted, yes. Maybe we can go for one more final question before formally closing the webinar. And as Jose Antonio and Luis said before, if there are more questions, you have their addresses. You will see them again in the materials we will send to you. So we go for one more question. The last one, if there is. No?
If not, we can solve the question of the Paris Agreement.
Please.
So meanwhile, we wait for the next question. The resolution of the use of 6.2, 6.4, or 6.8 is clear. If we want to transfer 1 million tons from a regional system to any other country outside or any other national determined contributions outside the European Union, 6.8 cannot be used because it's a not market-based mechanism and doesn't mean the change of any carbon unit. 6.4 cannot be used because we have 35 carbon removals or soil emissions reductions according to a European Union regulation, not according to the regulation of the United Nations. Okay, so the only way will be 6.2. That is the transfer or international transfer or mitigation outcomes, but taking into consideration that a region cannot be part of that market, because that market is only open to parties of the convention, to parties of the Paris Agreement, and only countries and the European Union itself are parties of the Paris Agreement and parties of the convention. So the market is not open for regions. Inside the European Union, okay, I think that if the region works as a certification system, is the way in which the region will have the possibility to operate in the market, and also as a buyer or as a project developer. So it is open. It is not forbidden, so it is open for according to the legislation. So that was the solution of the question or of the quiz.
Thank you very much, Luis, and all the participants. Just to finalize, I will give the floor to Inmaculada Tola, the Director of the Climate Change Office, to close down this webinar. We expect this was of your interest, and thank you all. Inma, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Gemma. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Luis, José Antonio, all my colleagues organizing this seminar, and you all for your time, your questions, and your commitment with this important topic, the carbon markets and carbon offsetting mechanisms. It's time to close the seminar after 2 sessions where we have learned about many issues, principles of carbon markets, carbon pricing systems, the European Union emission trading scheme versus the voluntary emission offset schemes, the concept of additionality to avoid double counting, the nature-based solutions for offsetting emissions, and many others. There are many challenges ahead: new regulation, public-private collaboration to explore, and the need for training. Therefore, from the Andalusian Climate Change Office and this regional ministry, we invite you all to stay in touch and take advantage of the synergies between our different areas of expertise. During today, we will send you all the presentation used during the 2 sessions of the training, as well as extra materials very relevant in the field that Luis and José Antonio have gathered together for you to have them. So thank you for your attention. I hope we stay in touch, and bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to you all, and a pleasure to be part of this project. Thank you.